What is going on, everyone? I am meteorologist Jonathan Kagas. Welcome to another edition of Tropics Watch as we get ready to flip the calendar page into the last month of the season. There's still some stuff going on. We are coming at you live on clickorlando.com on the News 6 weather app and on the Pinpoint Hurricane app as well. If you are watching on YouTube, we are also live, and you don't have those apps, download them. They're free, and they will help you in all of your weather needs. The Hurricane app, of course, with hurricane season, and the weather app is a great tool to stay up to date on the daily forecast for Central Florida. All right, so before we get into this, I do want to highlight what we're going to talk about. There are two areas that the Hurricane Center has highlighted. One is not of concern. The second one is a little more of concern, so we're going to break that down, especially for Central America. There is an outside shot, though, that this lives to the north. You see that little nub there closer. It's kind of focused more towards Belize and Yucatan. Some ensembles, which we will take a look at. We're going to break down a bunch of modeling in just 1 second as we move forward through this live stream. So again, welcome. If you're watching on YouTube, post in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if you are finding this content helpful, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button. It does help us out a lot. Lets us know how we are doing as well. So again, welcome to everybody that is tuning in. Let's get right to it here. Let me get my comment thing off the screen. We'll bring over your comments as well if you post them in the comment section. First and foremost, we have this little yellow area hanging around the Bahamas off the coast of Florida. We'll take a closer look with the visible satellite imagery. It's not healthy. It's not expected to develop anymore. They're outside shot. But more likely than not, this is going to turn away from the United States and not develop. I'll show you that in a closer view in a second. The area that we are watching closely is around Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands right now. Its area of development potential is going to be closer to the central and western Caribbean, with an outside shot that this kind of lifts to the north and east. So first and foremost, we're going to get the easy one out of the way here. This one, you see the area of spin. You see the swirl here on the visible satellite. It is right in there. There's not a lot of big thunderstorms around it, and that is the reason why this isn't a named system. It's not a depression. It's not anything like that, because to become a tropical system, it needs to have a well-defined center, which we do have, but it needs to also have thunderstorms developing around the center and then wrapping around it, and then that's how these things kind of develop and grow. There's not that. So it has part of the definition of what a tropical cyclone is, but not all. So again, that's one of the reasons why this is not a depression, and then that's one of the reasons why its development opportunity is quickly dropping. Again, the window is still open, but it is rapidly closing. Still would not be surprised if we get a short-lived depression or named storm out of this, but this is going to do one of these and kind of button hook away from Florida in the United States. Again, we might get some inclement weather. We likely will get some showery weather into the northern Bahamas over the next day or so. But again, this is not going to be a huge issue for a lot of people. Now onto the one that could be in the future. Right now, there's not much going on with this system. And again, that is a good thing. Of course, we don't want anything to be going on. Hey, Tommy Lee, what's going on in Melbourne? Thank you again for tuning into the live stream. Always good to see you, my friend. Hopping on from Melbourne, Florida, the great city of Melbourne. San Juan, we're getting some thunderstorms now. Eastern Puerto Rico through Culebra into the Virgin Islands, we're getting some inclement weather. We have this trough of low pressure that's kind of chilling right here in the Eastern Caribbean. Subtle swirl, very broad swirl right there. This is eventually going to travel in this direction. So the first couple of things we're going to watch for, does it start to materialize early, late? What is the speed of this? That has everything to do with, is this going to lift back into the Gulf of Mexico or the Southwest Atlantic, closer to Jamaica, Cuba, maybe Florida and the Bahamas, or does it continue going west and then impact our friends in Central America? So there's still a lot of questions with that, and when I show you the models, you will see why. Let me go to my next slide, and first and foremost, what we're going to look at after I show you the models will be the wind shear. Now, basically going to tell the story here that the environment is unfortunately still really, really good for development. Again, good for the storm, bad for us. So whenever I say good, again, it does not mean I'm rooting for a storm here. I want to be clear about that. You guys have been with me for a long period of time now through the season and last season. You know I don't embellish or hype or root for any of that junk. So want to be clear about that. This is from a storm perspective, but I want to show you the European ensembles. I like to show you the ensembles. It kind of shows the range of outcomes rather than kind of one-point model forecast. So these are the European ensembles. And what these kind of show is just like a band ensemble is made up of every different member, like the trumpet and the drum and everything else. Same deal here. Different conditions are put into the model, and when you get a consensus, a very tight consensus, you have a pretty good idea that that's where the storm's going to go. Still, there's a lot of uncertainty here. The European doesn't get this storm very strong, and it favors this getting into the Western Caribbean. There are a few members that take it further north toward Belize and the Yucatan, and there's one lone member that takes it toward Florida. The GFS is a little different. Now, we're going to take the GFS with a grain of salt, of course. It's been pretty off this whole season. I will say, though, that the European did miss Tammy with its strength, so there could be some issues going on with the strength of that thing from the European. Nonetheless, the GFS is a very different solution where you see a lot of these pink colors popping up. That is those members getting the storm very, very strong, and then also really taking it north and northeast even, closer to the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Cuba, the Yucatan Channel, Florida in play here, the Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas. So that's why antennas up, we watch that. But there's a couple of things going on here. One of the reasons why I do think this is on the unlikely scenario. I'm not going to shut the door on this thing coming north or going northeast. I'm just not going to do that. There's still too much, even 6 or 7 days out, to kind of come into play. And one of those things that are coming into play is, and the trend here, as you take a look at tropicaltidbits.com, that was weathernerds.org. That is a great site to get your ensemble information, by the way. Shout out to Weather Nerds. This is the GFS parent, the operational model here. So its ensembles were favoring a curve. Well, the operational wants it to go right into Central America. One of the reasons for that is, look at this, one of the trends that we are going to watch, again, we always watch the trends, is this developing ridge of high pressure. Look at this circle right here, this little circle, or oval, kind of bent oval. That is a big area of high pressure building at the 500 millibar level at about 15 to 20,000 feet above our head. That builds from the Bay of Campeche back to the Yucatan, back through Cuba, back toward Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and then over Florida, the Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas. If that comes into fruition, this thing is going west, and it's not going to have a shot to come up. Two of the caveats: if it goes slow and ends up, it could work its way around it and be lifted up. If it goes fast, it may miss it in general. So, regardless, I think this is impacting somebody. The question is strength, and I'll show you the environment in just 1 second. It's not good. It's good for the storm. But then speed. Again, a slower storm, this ridge of high pressure can then kind of push back out to the southwest Atlantic and giving it another reason to go up. There's also a dip in the jet stream. You kind of see these lines going like this. That would help to pull it. So if this little ridge right here is not there, it's going to have that tendency to come north. Again, I think that's on the outside realm of possibilities. I think it's a non-zero chance, but I think the highest probability at this point is going to be for that blue area there. That is the anomaly on the low pressure side to head towards Central America. So we're going to watch it close for our friends in Central America, okay? So want to be clear about a couple of things there. Want to get back to the wind shear. Let me check some of the comments here. Hey, Chuck, good morning. Michael, welcome, tuning in from Tampa. Great to have you guys on board here this morning. Thank you so much. All right, so the one issue here is that we're not going to have a ton of wind shear. We like to have wind shear. That kind of helps things. All that darker blue you see popping up, this is that dip in the jet stream, that cold front that is going to bring some much colder air to Florida and really put a lot of the United States in the freezer over the next couple of days. Some of us already are. But we like this wind shear here. So there's a lot of it towards the top of your screen, over Florida, over the deep south. The darker the color, the stronger the wind shear. The lighter the color, the lower the wind shear. And then the wind shear here is pretty much non-existent. So by the time the storm is right here, there's not a lot of wind shear. So that's not good. Again, so environmentally speaking, and again, with that upper ridge building there, that helps the storm ventilate as well. So while it would be a thing to keep it from lifting into the Gulf of Mexico or into the Southwest Atlantic, it would help the storm ventilate and it would push it further west. So again, this would not be a good scenario for our friends in Central America that, of course, are still recovering from Eta and Iota a couple years ago. So keep that in mind, that if this does get its legs and if it does try to develop, it's not going to be a good scenario for somebody. So I want everybody to remember that as well. That is the wind shear there. I want to show you just the point forecast again. And here we go. All of this red is areas of spin. When it's a circle, it is more consolidated. It is more concise. And all that stuff starts to come into play. So here is, at this point, still a broad area. That's November 2nd. Time is up on the screen. That is a broad area trying to develop. And then I kind of showed you this scenario already, a strengthening storm with the upper level pattern. That was the GFS pattern that I showed you. A developing system, a strengthening system here coming towards Central America in that November 4th, November 5th time frame. So we're going to be watching that closely as we move into the next couple of days and into the early stages of November. The European is a little weaker. It does struggle with strength. It does a pretty good job with the track, but it does struggle with strength. Here we go. At this point on November 3rd, we just have a very open wave, very broad area of low pressure, just chilling right there in the Western Caribbean. It does go west into Central America, but it is very, very weak. The GFS is favoring a stronger system. The Euro is favoring a weaker system. I will say, though, with the lower wind shear and with the tropical cyclone heat potential, the very warm and very deeply warm water, we're going to have to watch this closely. Notice we are starting to have fall come in play there. We're on the lower side finally. We've had a couple of cold fronts come to chill down the Gulf of Mexico a little bit, but here we still have jet fuel through the Yucatan Channel into the Western Caribbean back towards Jamaica. So basically in that development zone, we are still very high in that tropical cyclone heat potential. And again, what that is that not just warm water, but deeply warm water. So when those systems come over the water, we always like when they go over that and they kind of churn up that cooler water. It helps to kind of a self-inflicted wound, if you will, as it moves over. It kind of brings up wells that cooler water that resides beneath the warm ocean surface. In the Western Caribbean, towards the Yucatan Channel, even to the Florida Straits, we just don't have that. We've talked about a lot on this channel and a lot on clickorlando.com that we just have crazy amounts of warmth, record warmth, in fact, in parts of the Western Caribbean, and that continues to hang on. So keep that in mind, that limited wind shear, a lot of jet fuel warmth in the Western Caribbean, Yucatan Channel area. That's why we watch, even at this time of the year, even as we round out the season, we're still watching. Sea surface temperature anomaly, again, I just showed you that we are on the lower side in terms of heat potential in the Gulf, but we are still way above normal closer to the shore here. The darker reds indicating a couple degrees Celsius above normal. We certainly have that above normal water temperature pretty much the entire length of the Western Caribbean. Remember, the heat potential was high. We're closer to normal, though, when you start to get back towards the yellow shaded areas. So that is normal for the Caribbean to be jet fuel into November. It's one of the places that we look. Update on the season. Again, we just got rid of Tammy. We had Tammy, then it went away, then it came back again. It maxed out as a Category 2 storm. There are only 2 names left on the list. I think regardless of where this thing goes, it is starting to look likely that we are going to get another named storm of the season. That would be potentially Vince. And that leaves us with 2 names left, again, on the season. If that happens, if we do cross off both of those names, then we go to the supplemental list. Again, this list has never been used. The entire Greek alphabet got retired in 2020 because with better satellite technology and with the warming water, again, we have a much better chance to get those ugly-looking subtropical storms that do get named on the front end and on the back end of the season. Sometimes they're able to wrap themselves up in the tropical systems because the water is just so warm. So if we're naming more storms because of both we have better detection and because of the warmer water, we're going to get into that range of potentially getting into that needing more names than just the allotted hurricane season list. So again, we've never gotten to use this name before. Hopefully we never have to. But the whole Greek alphabet, which was used, is now completely over with. Again, that was new in 2021. We've only exhausted the list twice Of course, that was back in 2005, that insane season, and then, of course, also in 2020. Climatologically, the two areas that we watch are in the Western Caribbean, toward the Yucatan Channel. Again, this is where we still have jet fuel. I showed you that on the heat potential map. Where we're watching this one develop is kind of in a weird spot here closer to Puerto Rico, but then again, once it gets into this range, that's where it's more normal for development. We had that little swirl that I showed you earlier that is likely not going to develop. Still an outside shot for that to happen. But that's another area. Those cold fronts come down. We get a little spinach, and sometimes you get a tropical system to develop. And then way out here, you can get something meandering, but those move away. Again, those cold fronts become more prolific. It typically protects the eastern seaboard, but again, with those dips in the jet stream that follow, every now and then we start to get those systems to lift north. That's why we always watch, even into November, those systems. Of course, Nicole did that. If you remember Nicole, we're coming up on the anniversary of Nicole. Nicole did one of these things where it kind of developed. It was weird. It was ugly looking, and then was able to become tropical kind of the last minute. They're a very large system, then come in toward eastern Florida. Again, that is one thing. We're not looking at anything like that this year anyway for something coming at us from the East Coast. If something were to come toward Florida, it would likely be coming out of this realm and then coming up and over onto the Gulf Coast. Outside shot this time, it's looking more likely, though, with that little disturbance in the Caribbean, that it goes towards the Western Caribbean. So here's where we stand this hurricane season. We're almost done. We're not done completely, but we are almost done, especially when you have these crazy warm waters, and especially as we have favorable atmospheric conditions, even though we are on the downswing. And again, we are getting ready to, of course, move into November. We're on the kind of the back end of that sharp decrease in tropical activity. Climatologically speaking, it does appear that we are going to keep things active at least through the first half of November. Not only do we have those two things that the Hurricane Center has highlighted, and one of those has a much better shot than the other, as I showed you, to develop, we also have something known as the Central American Gyre. It's that semi-permanent system. We've talked about that a lot on this channel. That looks like it could maybe spit out a storm as we get deeper into November. It looks like it's going to do so on the eastern Pacific side, so we're always watching for that as well. Where we stand in terms of ACE, accumulated cyclone energy, every time a storm reaches tropical storm status, ACE starts to generate. The longer the storm is active and the stronger the storm active, it accumulates these points. And to date, with all the storms combined, we're up to 160. That is a very active year. The average is 123. So again, even though we're in El Nino, the warmer water has kind of counteracted that. That was the big question at the beginning of the season. Was El Nino's wind shear going to win? The warmer waters have kind of counteracted some of the negative effects that El Nino brings on. And we are, of course, we're able to have a very active season. Now, it hasn't been, with the exception of Idalia, most of these storms have stayed out to sea. So I know a lot of people are like, oh, they were talking for this big active season. But it has been. Most of it, with the exception of Idalia, of course, which impacted the Florida Big Bend Panhandle region earlier this year, most of these have been out to sea or have been impacted as tropical systems, tropical storms, and on the lower end side. So it has been a very active year. If you haven't been paying close attention, then you wouldn't know, because there hasn't been a lot of coverage, because there's only been really one big system. Of course, that really, really impacted our friends in the Big Bend and Panhandle region. But nonetheless, that's where we stand. Alrighty, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Tropics Watch. We hang out every Monday at 11 and as needed. Hopefully the as needed stretch has gone away for this season, but we are watching again closely for the Caribbean over the next couple of days into the first part of November, because of that little thing that's highlighted by the Hurricane Center that's giving some inclement weather to Puerto Rico at this time. Thank you guys a ton for tuning in. Again, if you want to stay updated on all things weather and, of course, the rest of hurricane season, next Tropics Watch Live coming at you next week, post-time change. We'll catch you then at about 11 o'clock Eastern on this channel. Thank you guys so much for tuning in on clickorlando.com, the Pinpoint Hurricane app, the Pinpoint Weather app, and, of course, for sending in your comments on YouTube. We'll catch you next